Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Welcome to our talk. This week, the topic is wildfire season. And here in Los Angeles, that is sort of what it is this is the season where it's so dry. And almost every week, you have friends marking themselves safe from one fire or another. It's devastating and painful and scary and all of those things. So that was on my mind. And I also started thinking about these sort of like birth cycles and death cycles, which I think are a thing. Certainly I have noticed this in my own life where sometimes in all areas, like you feel like you're like thriving or things are flowing, you're creating, maybe it's like your personal life or it's whatever it is, like just things feel like they are, there's growth and there's just this sort of alive feeling. And then there are also these cycles where it feels like things are coming to an end, a relationship or a way of being, or an actual, you lose someone. And then there are, of course, times where like maybe you're, you have a combination of things going on. Some things are flowing, some things are not feeling like they're fitting anymore. But I have found that it's very frequently sort of like the theme or the energy seems to be one or the other. And maybe there are some like bright lights within that. And I have certainly been in something of a death cycle for a while. And I've been writing about it and talking about it. I think it's so important to talk about grief because we're all going to experience it. And in our culture, we really don't talk about it a lot. I've certainly found people kind of I think there's an avoidance if someone is going through that because it reminds people of either their own mortality or their own vulnerability, their own reality that the people that they love as well. Everyone's got an expiration date, right? None of us is going to live forever and ever. And so when you love people, whether you want to consciously bring it, into your awareness or not, there's a possibility either you are at some point going or they are. It's painful. It's a painful reality that I think we kind of try to push to the side. And certainly we have our pets. We have, I just lost the family dog. Our dog died on October 29th. And I was writing about that this week because, here it is 6 weeks later and the reality of it has, of course, set in. The first couple of weeks, I was still sort of walk into a room and kind of expect him to be there or hear something and think it was his paws on the wood floor or, it just didn't seem real yet. And I think there is this element of shock when we lose, pets that we love, that are family members, or we lose people. There is this shock that occurs even if you knew it was coming. In my dog's case, I really didn't know. It was pretty sudden. He was 12, and this happened with my last dog as well. I tend to like big dogs, and big dogs don't live as long. And my last dog, he died really suddenly. He was 10, and he had just had a senior profile that was great. I was about to give birth. I was 2 weeks away from, I was 8.5 months pregnant, and he just woke up one morning and could not walk in a straight line, and, raced him to the vet, and she sent us racing to the emergency vet, and he did not make it. And it was horrible. Like, it was just, they were doing chest compressions like they do for people, and they managed to get him back. And then as I was trying to figure, does the surgery make sense? He had a tumor bleeding out in his belly. He arrested again. They brought him back again, but then they needed to put him on a machine to breathe for him, and the vet told me, like, he's not going to make it through a surgery. So, I had to say goodbye to him. And he had been my best friend for that entire decade. This is before I had children, and he was my everything. He had made the move across the country with me, and just been through so many things. So I knew with my last dog, I understood, I knew going in, what the contract is. And I obviously knew he was 12. But he just had like puppy energy, and his health was really good. So it was sudden and really painful. And I think, the last week of his life, I brought him into the vet because he had this like little lump, and the vet didn't like the way it looked either. He had been chewing on it. It was bleeding. And so he went in for surgery that day, and it turned out it was not little. When they opened him up, it was not little. He came home with like a 6-inch incision and 8 different medications that I was like, like crushing and putting in peanut butter and feeding him peanut butter sandwiches. And for a good week, it seemed like he was doing really well. I thought he was gonna be okay. I thought we were gonna get, a few more good years out of him. And I brought him back for the post-op, and the vet thought he looked great. Everybody, it just seemed good. The biopsy hadn't come back yet. And then he took a turn. And so those last really 2 days of his life were it was awful. It was really, really painful. And I felt powerless. I was doing the best that I could to like make sure he was not suffering. I was waiting for this biopsy result to come back. The vet was basically saying, don't put him through the stress of bringing him in until we get these results, trying to get the lab to move faster, all that stuff. And he ended up passing away in our living room. He had his head in my lap for most of the day. I got my daughter to come home from school, and he ended up sort of like heaving himself up and shifting over, and he put his head in her lap, and that's where he took his last breath. And it was just, it was devastating. We've had him for 12 years. My kids grew up with him, and I had to FaceTime my son in because he was up at college. It was so painful, and that heartbreak when also your kids are going through heartbreak, yeah. And so one of the things that I was writing about is how one grief tends to like open the floodgates for all the other grief that you carry. And I've just had the last few years of my life have been dominated really by grief and grieving. And it started with my mother during the pandemic, and she passed away at the end of 2021, right before Christmas, a few weeks before Christmas, December 7th. And that was gutting and traumatic. She had ALS, and it really came out of nowhere. She does not have the genetic marker for it. It just, known in the family. It just was like out of left field, and incredibly painful for her, obviously, and for everyone who loved her, all of the people. It just was, it's a terrible any of those sort of motor neuron degenerative diseases are so painful. And there were a lot of other things. There were a lot of other things wrapped up in there. My mom and I, there's so much love there, but it was just such a difficult, complicated relationship because she was an alcoholic, and there was more to it. She had a lot of rage that she directed at me, and it just was a complicated, as much as I loved her, and I loved her. There was never a moment in my life that I didn't long for my mother, or, I think I was grieving the relationship I could never have with her for a very long time too. And that's something else that I, wanted to talk about today, is that grief is not just tied to literal death. It's also sometimes you're mourning, you're grieving for someone who is very much alive. You're grieving because there's an end of a relationship that was really important to you, or a way of being. Even sometimes when you're making positive changes in your life, but you're kind of like, crashing your own hard drive and trying to rewire the system. Even there can be some grief and some depression, even because it's unknown territory, and change is always scary, and letting go of things is scary. We as human beings really like to hold on tightly, even though the nature of being human and the nature of life itself is that everything is in a constant state of flux. And the more that we can kind of just, embrace that and understand that, the easier the ride. But it's difficult. It's really, really painful. And of course, there's this idea that attachment leads to suffering, and it does. I don't think there's really any way around that. I've never been the kind of yogi. I've been practicing yoga for over 30 years now, 33 years. Like, I never have aspired to be someone who reached such a state of non-attachment that I wouldn't be devastated if I lost someone I loved. I don't think anyone's trying to get to that place. It's more that you're trying to look at attachments to other things, like, particular outcomes in any given situation, or like a pair of shoes, or, whatever it is, like an attachment to things going the way that you feel that they should, trying to really lessen our attachments in those areas. But as far as the people that we love, the pets that we love, it is baked in to the equation that there's going to be some suffering at some point, because none of us, we don't last forever. And so that's been with my mother. I think the trauma of watching someone who was such a force of nature just be ravaged, it was like, if you could imagine like the most vibrant kind of like tree, and then just a storm busting through, and there's nothing left but just like the branches, it was hard to fathom. And there were other things too. She blamed me for the onset of her ALS, and she held on to that narrative for a really long time, and that was incredibly painful, and something I'm writing about in the memoir. But it's just also things that happened right after she died were really difficult, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit today, because I think part of what we are missing in our culture, and there are now like death doulas, there are people who, and hospice workers who are amazing, and nurses are, they're like a special breed of person, but there was a lack at the very end there with my mom. There was a lack of support. And I really didn't know what to do. There was also some confusion. She, at the end, that last weekend of her life, I was trying to switch her into the hospice network. She had Medicare, and I was trying to, we were going to try to bring her home for Christmas. And I left, I would come back to LA for like a night or two and just like look at my kids, and then get back on a plane and go back and be in the ICU with my mom. And so I had spent like hours just filling out this paperwork and hours on the phone trying to arrange a team of hospice workers to come to the house. And one of her really close friends had made a donation to this organization that will help you find 20, be able to afford 24-hour care, which your insurance will not cover. So there were a lot of moving pieces and things that I was trying to deal with there, at the end. And then she took a turn and was not doing well, so I had to get on a plane and get there. And they had not moved her into the hospice part of the hospital because the end was, her decline was really rapid there at the end. And so when she passed, I don't think I will talk about this too much because I will fall apart, but there wasn't, I ended up basically, it was 3:37 a.m. My brother and my stepdad had gone finally to like pass out in the other bed in the room. And my brother curled up on the floor, I think around 2:30 and fell asleep. And so when my mom passed, it was just me there awake with her and like holding her hand and stroking her hair and telling her, not to worry, like I was going to take care of everything. Just trying to like make it, I didn't want her to be afraid. And so when the doctor came in and sort of like, gave the time of death and the nurses gave me their condolences and they all left, I had to tell my brother and tell my stepdad. And that was horrifying. And other things happened that I won't talk about. But when they took the breathing apparatus off of her, like it's an image that it does me in, it's really hard. And so there was a lot of confusion. We sent my stepdad home with a family friend because it was just, he couldn't bear to see her like that. My brother and I wanted to stay in the room with her body for a while. And, there is a really, and now I've been in a room now because I was also, when my dad passed away, I went and sat with him. I was not there when it happened. It happened early in the early morning hours in July of 2023. But as soon as there was a hospice worker with him, and they were trying to reach me, my phone was on vibrate, so I didn't hear. And then police came and knocked on the door at 7:00 in the morning on a Saturday, and told me that that's what they do, they send police if they can't reach you. So that was like a really disconcerting way to find out too. And I went and sat with his body. I went right away. So I've been in the room now with both of my parents, and there is something that you can feel when a person leaves their body. There is you can feel that like they're not there anymore, and I know this is like, it's intense conversation, but you can feel that. I could feel that with my mother. I could feel her leave. And so there is this thing of like, it's just her body, or like, it's just your body. Like your body is just your house, right? Like your essence, your soul, whatever you want to call it, your energy is housed inside this body. But that use of the word just is kind of like, it's your mother's body. This is the body that like you grew inside of, or, depending if you were adopted, whatever. So it's just the body that was there that like, like the back of your hand, your mother's hand, her voice, her, like the expressions on her face, her eyes, her, it's just like, it's her frame, like her, just all of it, is a body that is like sacred to you, even if you've had the most challenging relationship, or there's been pain there, or, that body has caused you. Like, it's still, there's something just, there's just something really, I don't have another word other than sacred about it, And so we were there with her, and I feel like there's such a rush to cover people's faces. And I don't know if that's from the movies. I don't know if it's just and it was really difficult. It was painful. Like, I can still see her face, and she didn't look like she was at peace, and that's the part that's really hard to live with. But I still was not in a rush to like cover her face, and I think there is something in us that's like, we don't want to take it in, because it hurts, but it's also, it's part of life. And I think the ability to hold that and be with that is important for all of us. Like, I think it's part of the healing process, and it's part of understanding life more deeply and understanding impermanence, and really not allowing yourself to miss that message of like, hey, you're not going to be here forever. Like, don't waste time. I think it's really important to not avoid taking that in. And what happened with my mother was something that I wrote about briefly. It's just like I had arranged the cremation account for her because I did know that the end was near. And so I called them, but the nurse there said to me, tell them that she's in the hospice part of the hospital, because then they'll come right away to get her. If you don't say that, if you tell them that she's in the regular part of the hospital, then it'll probably be 12 hours before they're here, and we'll have to put her in the morgue, like in the drawer, which I really wish I didn't. That was not an image that I needed, and it really wasn't helpful. I think she really meant well. They had not moved my mother into the hospice part of the hospital yet. They were going to, but it happened so quickly at the end that they didn't. So she was in the regular part of the hospital, and I called the cremation, place and said, my mother has passed. And the guy, of course, expressed his condolences and said, I'll be there, by 5 p.m. It was about 5 a.m. when I called, maybe a little bit earlier than that. And I said, I'm supposed to tell you she's in the hospice part of the hospital. I didn't want to lie, and he was like, what do you, I said, well, she was going to be transferred. And he was like, well, it doesn't matter, like, where she is. If she was in the hospice part of the hospital or not, I wouldn't be able to get there sooner. And I said, okay. I was really confused by that, like what was happening. And I said, okay, I understand. And, we got off the phone, and the nurse said, that's not true. Like, I've had the doctor sign the death certificate really quickly here so that they could come and get her. And I just it turned into this thing. And she was like, sometimes, like, you should call back and just ask him if there's anything you can do. Like, maybe, they might want like a tip. And I'm like, it was just really, it became this thing. And so I did call back again, and I said, is there anything I could do? And he said to me, I've been doing this for 25 years. I've never, ever, I don't know what is happening with this nurse or what's going on there, but this is really strange. And this is not a conversation like you and I. You should not be worrying about this or thinking about this. Like, I'm going to pick up your mother. I'm going to I promise you, like, she will be well taken care of. I don't want you worrying about this, but no matter what, there's nothing I can do. I can't get there sooner. So at that point, when I hung up with him, I just said to her, like, I'm not going to call again. Like, he's going to be here by 5. There's nothing I can do. And she said, well, you can have about 45 minutes with her. Then we're going to have to, like, take her, and essentially, like, if she'd been in the hospice part, you could have sat with her as long as you want. I mean, it was just, I don't know, it was an unfortunate thing that happened. And the nurses were amazing the entire time. They were amazing. I would not have made it through without them. So I want to be really clear about that. It's just this particular nurse I had not met before. I don't know what was going on. I do think she meant well. But it created this thing in my mind of like imagining what was going to happen to my mother's body, it just was devastating. It was extra devastating. And so we were in the room with her, and I just wish there had been more. I wasn't prepared. I'd been doing so many other things, advocating for her and all those kinds of, phone calls and paperwork and being there with her, like holding her hand and talking to her and just being there with her. And she was conscious for all of it till the very end, and she and I did a lot of healing in the last few weeks while she was while she was in the ICU. We probably had the most important conversations of our entire relationship at a point where she couldn't speak, which is kind of, ironic. But she could communicate in other ways. But I just wish that I had, thought about maybe like there's this ritual of just like opening the window and letting the soul or the spirit or whatever you believe, the energy of the person, like out and up, or just if I had had a candle to light, or I don't even know if you can light a candle, but like I wish I had been more prepared in that way, or that there had been someone there to say to me like, why don't you write a card to like leave with her, or like just something that would have felt a little better than what happened, which just felt like this unprepared little bit of like chaos. And then when they came in after that 45 minutes, they basically asked my brother and I to like move away, and they put her in a bag and moved her onto a gurney and wheeled her out of the room. And that was it. It was horrible. It wasn't good. It felt terrible. And really we should have been told to say goodbye and go home. Like there just were things that weren't managed well, and that unfortunately, like it has such an impact on your grieving, because you have these things going on in your head. And so then and my brother, I'm older, and I think he was looking to me to like know what to do. And I didn't know, but I said, okay, I think we should just sort of like pack up the room, like make sure we have all of her things and head home. And that's what we did. But as I was moving away, we got in a cab and we were taking a taxi, up First Avenue. It was like 5:45 in the morning, and everything about it felt wrong. I just was leaving my mother's body in this hospital in a bag, knowing she was going to a drawer. It was just not, it wasn't good. And I had a lot of other things happen after, I went home and passed out for a couple of hours, and my stepdad woke up. He'd also slept for just a few hours, and I was going back to LA later that day, and he was expressing like, I can't have all of her stuff around me. Grief is a funny thing. It's very easy to sometimes, like there's a case in the news or something, and you'll see someone interviewed and people will start judging the way they seem. This person doesn't seem emotional, or they're saying things that don't seem right. It's like, listen, when someone is in that state of shock and grieving, it comes out in strange ways. It's like it can, it doesn't always look like someone weeping, or sometimes people are just, it is incomprehensible that this person is gone. And, one of the Sandy Hook dads, the first one to speak to the press, like he just wrote a book, and the name is escaping me right now. His daughter's name was Emily, and he was the first one to do an interview, and he was gutted, as you would be, absolutely. And he had family members with him. He gave a press conference, and at some point he looked at his family members, and he kind of like had an expression somewhere between, like, a sob and a laugh, just like how do you even deal with this? And he was like blasted, and that is partly why Alex Jones began this whole thing of saying it's not real, you just don't, it's not a moment in time where you want to be judging anybody's behavior. So my stepdad was very much like, I can't have her stuff everywhere. And so a few hours after my mom had passed, was going through her things. My brother and I went and got boxes, and I started packing up her room, like her closets, her drawers, her jewelry, like all the things that he just didn't want to have around the bathroom. And I wasn't ready to be doing that, but it's like you do whatever you can do to, like, help a family member, right? Especially someone who's going to be living in the apartment where she's lived for 50 years. So I had a panic attack on my way from the building to the subway. First one in my life. Never had one before. Did not know what they were. I mean, I knew what they were conceptually. I'd certainly worked with people who were struggling with that, having like really massive anxiety, PTSD, all of that. But I had never experienced a panic attack. I'd experienced anxiety in my life, but I had not ever experienced that. And it was basically, as I was leaving the lobby of the building, it occurred to me, like, she's never going to walk through this lobby again. She's never going to, like, walk down the street again. The street that I grew up on, that I walked down a million times. And I had this panic of, like, where is she? Like, where is she? Where is she? And I just have never experienced, I lost my peripheral vision. I couldn't breathe. Like, it was really intense. And luckily I've been practicing yoga for 33 years, so I have some tools, and but it was beyond anything I had experienced before. And that is the thing about grief. So with my mother's, and that was sort of the beginning of this season, if you will. And then about 4 months later, my half-sister passed away very suddenly. And she is someone I had only, just become friends with over the prior couple of years. She was from my dad's first marriage. He was married, he had a son and a daughter, and he met my mom, had an affair, left his family, married my mom, had me, had lots of affairs, left my mom, 4 wives later. But she and I reached out to her when my dad turned 93, because I thought, like, I didn't want the next time I saw her to be at his funeral. And so she and I actually struck up a really nice friendship. We started talking every week, and she had, during the pandemic, gone to get our dad. He was in an assisted living facility with his 4th wife, who happened to be his high school sweetheart. And his wife needed to go into the memory care unit. He could not go with her. And so my half-sister went to get him. She was in Georgia. She drove to get him. He was in Pennsylvania at that point. And she brought him back to Georgia with her. And she said to me, and this is, my mother was like, she was battling ALS. She said to me, you deal with your mom. I'm going to go get our dad. Like, just don't worry about that. I don't have kids. I'm retired. I'm doing this. So I was very grateful. So she had moved him to an assisted living facility in Georgia near her. And she woke up one day and she had a stroke, and she didn't make it. And so then her husband, called and said, you got to take over everything she was doing for your dad. Like, my dad was a difficult person, and my sister's husband felt like the stress from dealing with him had really caused the stroke. And he was, So then I took over all the stuff she had been doing, ended up moving my dad to California and finding an assisted living facility for him out here. And then the whole year became that, taking care of my dad. And I have teenagers as this is going on in a business. Life goes on around you. It's the sandwich generation that people talk about. And so and then my dad, I was going out there like at, weekly and sometimes bi-weekly and tri-weekly depending on the week and what he needed and what was going on. And just I was in a daily conversation with him. And I have my stepdad in New York City. It's just, there's just a lot. and so it really did become this looming issue in my life over the last few years. And then my dad died, and he died right after his birthday. He turned 96 and he died 2 days later. So, and that experience with him has been, continues to be very different than my mom. I think as I got older, my compassion for my mother grew and grew. And for my dad, he was 20 years older than my mom. He was 45 when he had me. And when I look back on a lot of the things that happened when I was a kid, it's like, dude, you're way too old to be doing that. So my perspective really changed, and he hurt a lot of people, like all the women in his life and all 3 of his kids. But he was a good friend to a lot of people. It's one of those things. You can't paint anybody with one brush, but that was, suddenly both parents are gone, and it's a very untethered. You just feel untethered. You feel unmoored. My stepdad is still going strong, but it's a strange season in life to be dealing with all that. And in September, my oldest went to college, so he left the house. He's been living under my roof for 18 years, and it's, that was a huge shift. And I definitely went through some grieving and mourning, even though it's okay. For those of you who maybe are like anticipating that, it's okay. Like it's, the bond is nothing breaks that bond, even if your child is like at college. But it was still intense and a big change. And that's part of what happens in life, is that we're constantly, things grow, they peak, they flow, and then things change and other things come and grow. And, we're in this constant flux. What happened this week is I moved into the house that I'm in 20 years ago. And right when I moved in, there was a gardener. He's been coming to the house like for 20 years, twice a month, every other week, and just a lovely person, and would sometimes bring his wife. As he got older, he would sometimes bring his grandsons with him. His name is Martine. And, you know someone for 20 years, you get to know their family. Like, and when his wife would come, like, that was, you could always tell, like, that was his favorite, because they would laugh, and like that clearly had like a lot of love between them, and the grandsons were great. Like he had a family business that he built from nothing, and he just was a hardworking, loving family guy. And he went on a bike ride on Thanksgiving Day this year, last month, and he was hit by a car. The car did not stop. He didn't show up for dinner, and his kids called the hospitals and found out at like 11 o'clock at night that he was in the ICU on life support, and he did not make it. And I think just hearing that, that like, and there's a police investigation going on, just that someone could hit a human being on a bike while they're driving in a car and not stop is so, it's so horrifying, and thinking about his kids who lost their mom. She passed away from cancer a little over a year ago. Just that they're now like going through this experience of losing both parents in a very short amount of time, right before the holidays. Like, it's just, my heart broke for them, and also just feel so much rage about that, and sadness. And I think the world is feeling so hard to fathom right now. A lot of the things that have been happening, it just feels like people are making choices to be really kind of like hard-hearted, and it's painful. And one of the things that happened after our dog died in the living room is I called a pet cremation place. I wasn't prepared for it, and I am normally someone who like will vet, I don't, especially if it's like something important, I'm going to hire a company to do something, I will like look at reviews and ideally try to get a recommendation from someone I know. But there was just, you're not thinking clearly in that state when you've just lost a human being, or like with my mom and all the weird phone calls back and forth to the cremation center and the nurse and all this stuff, like, I think if I were in a different frame of mind, I would have said to her, can you please not, like, please, I can't take this in. Like, this isn't helping. If I'd been in a different state of mind, a lot of things would have been different. I would have opened the window. I would have, written a card. I mean, you're not in that frame of mind. And with the dog, it was the same thing. And that grief, that like losing the dog, it kind of like it opens the floodgates for my mom, my dad, like all of it, that whatever mechanism I have that enables me to get up and go through the day, even though the last few years have been so just brutal, really, with loss, that mechanism fails, right? You're like, okay, the river is gonna like flow through here for a while, because I'm just, yeah, it's like the grief dam has broken, and I'm just gonna be in that until I'm not, and there's nothing you can do except just kind of let it flow through you. And I know that, I'm aware of that. So that's kind of the state that I've been in. And hearing about Martine, like all of it's just like, anyway, the cremation place that I called, they did come and get the dog, and 6 weeks went by, no ashes. And they were supposed to have the urn back within 5 to 14 days. And, they were very like reassuring in that phone call when I called, very like, so sorry, compassionate. The first few weeks that I was calling to kind of check, because they said you have 24/7 access. You can call us anytime. We'll let you know where he is, what stage of the process things are in, like, we're here. And it, she charged my card. It was like $500. And she was like, I'm going to send you, an email receipt and links to the site, so you can like pick a special urn if you want to, if you want paw prints. We already had paw prints for our dog, but like, and that never happened. I never got the email receipt. I never got but I had the receipt from my credit card. I wasn't worried about that. But you're just in this state of mind where when she was telling me the cost, like it seemed a lot, but I couldn't remember what my last dog, it was 18 years ago. So I just said yes, right? Because you're like in this frame of mind of your best friend has just passed away in the living room. You're not like, it's not the moment to start looking at Google reviews and Yelp, So anyway, just as the weeks were going by, I called like 4 weeks in, and I'm like, I don't understand, like, where is his body? How can it be taking this long? I don't understand. I know we're really busy right now. Like, you should have it in the next few days. I'll have the manager call you. Like, all these things that would sort of like, I would say, okay, and then another week would go by. And so the other night, I woke up, I wasn't sleeping. I was like trying to sleep, and this was on my mind. So when I got up in the morning, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to look at reviews now, because I had not been doing that on purpose, because I was really hoping like everything was going to be okay. We would get the earn. But I finally went and looked at reviews, and it was awful. It was like really bad, like Better Business Bureau reviews, lawsuits, like a lot of people in the same situation. They sent their pet off. Somebody in one of the reviews said they outsource, and they don't say that anywhere on the site. And it just is an absolute mess. And so then I went and looked at my credit card statement, and sure enough, it was like an LLC whose name I didn't even recognize. It was not the name of the company. And I called that number, and this guy answered, and he was just like, "Hello," like no, didn't even sound like a business. And I said, "You've got this charge on my," and he's like, "Oh yeah, we're like the management company. This is the number you need." And it sounded like he'd had the same phone call a million times. He's like, "We have nothing to do with them. We just like do the billing." And I'm like, "Well, you do have something to do with them, because you charged my card, and like." You're working with them, for them, whatever it is. So, anyway, I ended up like, I called my credit card company and disputed the charge. But it doesn't matter. It's like, now it's like, and then when I called them that day, I said, I called the number back after I disputed the charge with my credit card company. I called the cremation place, and I said, "Listen, it's been 6 weeks. I now have looked at, this is like awful. I mean, it really is just unconscionable that, y'all are taking phone calls from people when they're incredibly distraught, charging their cards. And then this is what's happening. I'm like, you're outsourcing." And like, I don't even know now if I get an urn, if it's even my dog's ashes. Like, there's zero trust here, and she's like, "Oh, you know what? Your urn is going to be delivered tomorrow," which just felt like, really? I mean, okay, so I don't know. It's just a really bad experience. It was very disheartening. And then I had gotten a bill from my eye doctor, and when I was there, I had paid in person, so I was really confused by the bill. And that turned out to be a whole thing, where it's like they billed an old insurance company of mine, but then on the phone she was telling me that your eye insurance doesn't cover like medical stuff like astigmatism or cataract. It doesn't do that. It's really just for optometry. So, like, you really shouldn't have even like been here. You should have gone to your primary care to get a referral, but didn't say that to me when I went in and gave them my insurance card. Didn't say, "We don't take this insurance," or like, so it's just like all that kind of stuff. And it just wears at you, it wears away at you, the lack of compassion and empathy, I think, in the world, especially if you are someone who's dealing with a lot of grief. It is so disheartening, and it just kind of does you in. It's like hard enough, whatever you're dealing with, but then on top of that, to feel like people are being unethical, or they're preying on your intense feelings of just, you feel bereft, and like people are taking advantage while you're in that state, and I'm thinking about Martine and just all of it. And I had been planning to write the whole day. I had blocked out the day for writing, but then after getting off the phone with like the cremation place and the insurance and the like all of it, I just felt like so down, so kind of like done in, that I'm like, there's no way that I'm gonna be able to write in this frame of mind. And I had been noticing for like the last week that my whole backyard, it's just like the gutters around my studio were overflowing with dried leaves. There was a small tree that had sort of been blown. Some of the roots were showing from like the Santa Ana wind. It's been really windy here. It's wildfire season, right? A lot of it happens because of embers that are carried on the wind, and just the heat, the drought, the dryness, all of that. And I have like a Buddha garden for my mom, with like succulents and it's like a little altar for her. And that was kind of like overgrown and needed attention. And I thought, I'm just going to go and do those things right now. Like, I can't write. I need to move. I need to be outside. I need to be doing things. And And so that's what I did. And I'm not someone who, I grew up in New York City. I'm not like a green thumb person. I've gotten better over the years. I used to overwater my plants, which is such a like personality thing. But I've gotten better, but I'm certainly not like Susie Green Thumb or anything. So I just went out there and I started doing things. And then I got Martine's ladder out, and it made me feel, I don't know, it made me feel like I was sort of honoring him or something, and I started just cleaning out the gutters, and it was gross. Like there's these like the dead leaves, but underneath it was just like the muck, and I had like an industrial sized garbage. I was just clearing it all out, kind of every in 4 foot sections, climbing down, moving the ladder, doing it again. And I got it. I didn't have gloves. It was just like muddy, and I got to sort of like the last section, and I looked up at the roof, and I realized there was like a pile of leaves that had sort of collected from the wind. And I thought, if the wind blows again, they're just going to go back into the gutters. Like, I'm just going to climb up on the roof. So I got up on the roof, and when I stood up, I saw the other like sloped side of the roof that I couldn't see until I was standing up there, and it was just covered in like, I don't even know, 2 feet of dead, dried leaves, that really just were like kindling, just like sitting there waiting. And so I spent 3 hours up there just like putting leaves in bags. And I was thinking about how many times I've seen Martine up on the roof. And I just little, like, I would always, if he was doing like big projects where he was going to be, I would obviously bring him water, like ask him if he wanted any, and he always acted like that was, just like the most amazing thing, when it's nothing. It's like the very least, right? Anyone should do. And he just was like, yeah. So it helped being up there and working that way. It was like backbreaking. I was sweating. I ended up with like scratches and bruises and places that were bleeding. Like I needed it. It got me out of that state of feeling kind of hopeless, which is where I had ended up after the phone calls and just all of it. And, it occurred to me at a certain point, I was collecting the leaves, and you have to be really gentle with like dried leaves. Otherwise they just disintegrate. They just are like tiny little pieces that, so it's gently scooping up these leaves and putting them into the garbage bag over and over again. And then you get to a point where you're down to like one leaf, and kind of no matter what you do, the leaf up against the roof, it's gonna crumble. And so at the very end of the project, after I had filled 3 giant bags, I ended up getting a broom and just like sweeping those little pieces off. But as I was up there, I realized I was kind of writing in my head, because it occurred to me that like, this is it. It's like we all disintegrate eventually, and go back into the earth, go back into the rivers, go back into the trees, the stars, whatever. Like, this is what it is, right? And that everyone that was on my mind had been in that backyard. Like Martine, of course, my mom, both of my dogs. And now it was just me there. And that, eventually, like, I'm going to go too. And I'm emotional because I'm thinking about my kids. It's like, but it's the nature of things. Like, we're not here forever. And I think the more that you can sort of bring that into your awareness, the less you waste time, the more you really appreciate the time that you have with the people you love. And so as painful as it is, I know that there's a line, if you get too focused on that, like that you don't know how long you have and you don't know how long anyone else has, like that it can put you into a place of fear. I think you want to keep it in your consciousness enough that it's motivating you and inspiring you and not shutting you down. But I think culturally we don't do enough of it. We don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about grief enough. We don't talk about impermanence enough, so that when we lose people or pets, the shock of it is intense. It's a lot to manage on top of something that's already hard to manage. And I think that I wanted to, and I am, there is a part of me that, as painful as the last few years have been, and they have been, there's also something really beautiful about it. Like, I feel like it has softened me even more, like opened my heart even more. Um, it's really made me realize how fleeting it all is and how precious it all is in ways that I did before, but it drives it home to you when someone like my mom, I can't call her anymore. I can't get on a plane and go see her. I can't, it really puts it into just focus that, like, yeah, that's all of us. And don't kind of like don't allow that to be so far out of your kind of like regular consciousness that you are, like letting time go by, or feeling shut down or feeling hopeless, like to not let yourself be in that state for too long. Because, and I'm not talking about like spiritual bypassing or anything like that. I'm just talking about, you can be grieving and heartbroken and still wide awake and like active in your life, And that's what I'm talking about. And I think I'm glad the other day that I understood I can't sit here and write right now. I need to go outside and do something. And that's kind of the last part that I wanted to talk about, is just, if you are someone who is, you may be grieving other things, like a vision that you had for how the world was going to be. Or, if you're someone who is unhappy, like with the election and like what's coming, and like you might be in a state of grief over that, or feeling like you thought things were going to matter that ended up not mattering to a very difficult percentage of people, to like wrap your head around. Like, I think there are a lot of people who are just hurting right now and can, just deeply sad. And all of those feelings, whatever they are, whatever the reasons, if you're grieving, if you're scared, if you're anxious, like whatever those feelings are, you got to let yourself feel that stuff. But if you start to feel overwhelmed by it, which is how I was feeling the other morning, like, especially if you start feeling like there are that whole thing of like a lack of compassion or a lack of ethics or a lack of decency, if that starts to really overtake your thinking and the way that you're feeling, to remind yourself there are people who care and who will always do the right thing. They'll always try to do the right thing. Like, their heart is always going to be in the right place. They're always going to try to help if they see someone who's suffering or not okay. Like, not to lose sight of that, and not to let yourself get weighed down by that feeling of hopelessness, because it's not real. I unfortunately had just too many of those things on a morning where I was already feeling a lot of sadness and a lot of grief, and then to have these two kind of like back to back disheartening interactions over the phone, and like it was rough. And so if you find yourself in that state, to try to maybe do something totally different. I understand sometimes you can't, like if you have the kind of thing where you're like going to a job every day that you need to keep a roof over your head, you don't have the luxury of like getting on a roof and clearing leaves for the day, but maybe it's just like a walk after work that you wouldn't normally take. Or I think being outside really helped me. And to reach out to people who know how to be there without trying to solve things and fix things, but just can like listen and be there with you. I think that really matters. And then whatever else you can do for your mental health, your mental well-being, your emotional well-being, your physical well-being. Those things really matter. If I didn't have a yoga practice and a meditation practice, if I didn't know to get outside, like I wouldn't be okay, And so just to like figure out, and I'm not saying those are the things for everyone, but to figure out what it is for you. Like, what can I do that's going to disrupt this feeling of hopelessness, so that it doesn't pin me to my couch? Like, what can I just get that whole sort of like bodies in motion? Can I just get something moving here so that I don't spiral into a state where I think, everyone or everything it's all just hopeless and dark? Because it's not. Okay. Like, and that is what I came to by the end of the day. I really felt like, I felt this sense of like, yeah, we all are going to go. And, obviously, ideally, whenever that happens, of course, you hope you're going to go peacefully with your family around you, people who love you, and all of that. Of course, you hope that. I hope that for everyone, but that doesn't happen for everyone, unfortunately. And like, just to try to have some faith that like energy doesn't die. It changes form in one way or another, even if it's that you're going back into the earth and you're becoming part of the trees and the river and the stars again, like whatever, whatever your thoughts are. I'm not trying to, change that, but I'm just saying, try to remind yourself, like, you're going to live on in the memories of the people who loved you, and the energy of a place that you've been in a lot. Like, I can feel all of that energy in my backyard, and to try to honor those people that have gone and find ways to do that feel good to you and feel meaningful to you. And that will also help your state of mind. And the last thing I was going to say is kind of what I was saying last week too, is, I really am feeling, if you want to change the world, see if you can find a neighbor like on your block or in your community, someone who needs help. I guarantee you there's someone in your community who needs help somewhere. And, to try that. I think that that's something tangible. If each one of us did that, the world would start to look different and feel different. And that will make you feel better too. As much as you're doing something nice for someone else, it'll also restore your faith. Like, if you're doing it, you can guarantee other people are doing that too. So I hope I can at least leave you with a more hopeful, hopeful message. I know that grieving and talking about grief and writing about grief, it can be intense. A lot of people said they read the essay and they were in tears. And I hope they're good tears. It's like sometimes it's really good for us to release those feelings and not be trying to hold them in and not be trying to, like, quote unquote, keep it together. It's the nature of things to fall apart. They fall apart, they come back together in a different way. They fall apart, they come back together. Like, it's just, it's how it goes. You, me, creative endeavor, all of it. So the more you can kind of like recognize that and accept that, like, the sweeter the ride. So I hope some of that is helpful. And, I know it's like right before the holidays, it can be a really great time for people. It can also be really painful. If you're missing people, if you're struggling, if life isn't looking the way that you thought it would at this point, it can be really hard. And just to try to have some compassion for yourself, to be gentle with yourself, to do something nice for yourself, just to go easy. Really try to give yourself some grace, and some space to feel whatever you're feeling. And I'm sending you a lot of love and wishes for a gentle end to your year. We have a few more weeks before we're there, but we're coming in on it. So, yeah, I'm just sending you lots of love till next time.